there's no sugarcoating it. We are in a very difficult situation in the US at the moment. The attacks are very intense. Our side is still in the process of cohering a resistance. We warned during the first Trump presidency that the fight to get rid of Trump wasn't just about those immediate 4 years. We knew that next time they would come back more organized, more competent, more vicious, and that's exactly what's happened. We also want that the Biden presidency wasn't a sigh of relief, it was a chance to prepare. And there are ways that the left could have used that time better that would put us in a stronger position today. Obviously, I can't go into detail about every attack and response because we'd be here for weeks. So I'm mostly going to talk about deportations, both the deportations of undocumented people and the detention and attempted deportation of Palestine activists, and share a little bit about the broader resistance that is coming together and specifically about the labor fight back that we're seeing some glimmers of. So the deportations of undocumented people, I'm sure everyone's following it in the news, is extremely chilling. Every US president for a generation has had their own vicious deportation agenda, and no leftist will let anybody forget that Obama deported more people during his first term than Trump did. Obama had 1.1 million deportees. Trump only managed 800,000. Biden has also deported more in his term than compared with Trump's first time. It's actually not like particularly possible to deport all the 11 million undocumented people as Trump says that he wants to do. And there's a reason the Democrats and even more moderate Republicans haven't planned or enacted that in the past. The undocumented are a core part of the American economy. Agriculture, food service, domestic work, healthcare, childcare all completely rely on an undocumented underclass of workers. So Trump isn't really delivering on the mass deportation promise. And this is the part of the reason that he's pushing this self-deportation campaign to try and scare people into doing it themselves so that he can boost the numbers. And the current number is a little bit slippery, but the latest stats I could find is that month for month, Trump is deporting slower than Biden did in the same period. But the point was never to deport everybody. The point is to terrorize the community, broadcast the deportations loudly to appease Trump's most racist part of his base, and create a scapegoat for when all of his other policies fall apart, especially when we start feeling the tariffs and the massive social service cuts. And none of that is to say that we're just dealing with deportations as usual. What's different this time is the absolute campaign of fear and the total lack of due process. So I've lived in the US for coming up 10 years now. I live in California, which has the largest undocumented community in the country. They're about 6% of the population, and I have never seen people more afraid. People are scared to go to work, especially day laborers who wait in certain areas to be picked up to do cash in hand construction jobs, people who work in the fields, anywhere where there's a concentration of undocumented workers, it's very easy for ICE to come down on them. And if you want a general sense of the climate, look at the White House or ICE official Instagram accounts. It is like extremely unhinged stuff. I have to double take every day to check it's not a satire magazine every time they post. People don't want to drop their kids at school. ICE can go into schools and hospitals and churches now, which used to be prohibited. They were sensitive areas. Just last week, ICE tried to go into two schools in South LA, which is a historically Black neighborhood, but now very Latino. They fully lied. They said this to the school front office people that they had parental permission, as if that would ever happen. But thankfully, the union was prepared and the school turned them away. The teachers union in the LA district, which is the second biggest district in the country, is really strong against deportations. They have a history of resolutions about it. They're also looking at contract language to protect undocumented students. Their victorious strike back in 2019 had like undocumented families and anti-racism at the front and center, and it's been that long preparation is why the schools are relatively safe now. Broadly, there's a growing movement for immigrant rights. There's a concerted Know Your Rights campaign that in some instances has delayed and potentially even prevented deportations. So under the Fourth and Fifth Amendments to the Constitution, there are these provisions like you have a right to a lawyer, the ICE needs a signed warrant by a certain kind of judge for you to open the door. You're not required to let them in. You're not required to talk to them. And there are these little cards that give you a script when ICE shows up. And the printers who make those cards cannot keep up with the demand. Many of us carry them around. I carry them in my pockets when I'm at work, in all the languages that the people in my community speak. Right now, the movement is working really hard towards May Day, which is historically a very important day, not just for the obvious reasons, but because there were mass demos and a strike of immigrants in the 2000s that helped win DACA, which was Obama's temporary protection of undocumented children if they were brought here as children. And it's going to be a really good chance to show that immigrants are not just a besieged community, they're also an extremely powerful part of the working class. There are lots of political issues inside the movement. It's very much Chicano, like Mexican American led, which of course makes sense. They're such a target. The self-organization of the community is really impressive. Our comrades in Marx 21 are generally pretty looped into what's happening in immigrant rights, but none of us knew about the initial marches because they were built in specific Chicano community institutions. And that strategy comes at a cost. There are actually much larger layers of people who could be mobilized against deportations, but there's not currently an orientation towards them. And I disagree with that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, non-immigrants have a responsibility to show up right now, and we're obviously doing that, even though we're on the periphery of the organizing. And that's not just for moral reasons, but because the more the fear campaign goes on, the more people start to accept and believe it. And racist ideas about immigrants are poison to the working class, and they'll have us dobbing each other into ICE rather than uniting against our common enemy. Mm. Knowing our rights is also not enough. Rights don't exist in the abstract, like written down in the Constitution. Whether we have rights depends on the objective political conditions that we're living in. The Republicans have the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the Supreme Court. So you can send ICE away because they don't have a warrant today, but they can just go and get a warrant and come back tomorrow. And people can scream their rights in the street, and ICE will pick them up in plain clothes in unmarked vehicles regardless. In fact, one person did this last week, and ICE just smashed their car window and took them away anyway while they were on the phone to the lawyer. And that person is a unionized farm worker, and his union has marched to the detention center, and they're organizing around that. ICE is reportedly going to be monitoring social media, not just of tourists or immigrants, but domestically too, to see if they're posting content that is unfavorable to Trump and ICE's goals. So we need to start talking not just about knowing our rights, but defending our rights, taking our rights back. Palestine deportations. We're not only facing the undocumented ones, but the attacks on the Palestine activists, student activists. It's very naked what they're trying to do. It's on purpose that they went after someone at Columbia first, Mahmoud Khalil, because Columbia kicked off the encampment movement last year. And they're using Columbia as an example to pull everyone else in line, not just about Palestine, but about every social justice cause. And one of the things the government has demanded in exchange for Columbia getting their federal funds back is total control of like the ethnic studies type departments. And that's been on the table for a while, but now they basically want total control over the university, including things like hiring, curriculum. And it's a terrible strategy from Columbia to roll over like they did. It won't work to give in now. It's not going to protect anyone from future funding freezes. And it's weird to be on the side of an elite university, but thankfully Harvard has pushed back and isn't following Columbia's example. But the attacks on the individual universities and the attempted deportations aren't about removing all funding or deporting all activists. It's about making people so afraid that they won't fight anymore. The unions will stop taking political stands, the student groups will get shut down, and so on. Universities have already preemptively banned Students for Palestine groups in a lot of places as a way to show, like, we want to keep our federal funds. It's also a big distraction in a lot of ways. Like, obviously, of course, we have to be organizing around the people who've been detained, but it means that we're not organizing around the genocide that is still happening. People have to use their energy to scramble about this instead of mobilizing for Gaza. And it's intentional that Trump is going after the universities. They're some of the better unionized workplaces in the country, for one. And they're also one of the last places where you can have free discussion about ideas and politics. Not that they're exactly free right now, but Trump wants to destroy, what we have remaining of that. I'm starting to feel afraid myself. I'm a naturalized American citizen. I have an American passport. I'm white. I'm from a country that's very friendly to American capitalism. I'm cis. I don't study or work at a university, and I'm obviously not the highest person on the list. But I know I'm at risk because it wouldn't be the first time that the US revoked naturalized citizenship for political reasons. This is what they did to the Japanese during the Second World War. They rounded them up and they put them in camps. And I also know I'm at risk because Trump has said outright that they're coming for citizens next. This week, there was a report of ICE picking up a citizen and detaining them despite his mum presenting his American birth certificate. So every non-native born person I know is making a contingency plan at the moment. But we are not fleeing yet. There's still a lot of work to do. So I said a bit about immigrant rights movement, but more broadly, there are kind of two types of resistance cohering at the moment: institutional resistance and popular resistance. And there's obviously a relationship between the two. But there was already historic low trust in government institutions before Trump was reelected, especially because he stacked the Supreme Court during the first presidency. And now their hollowness is really on full display. Like federal judge after federal judge keep ruling against various actions. They ruled that Trump had to bring back the immigrant who was wrongly sent to the notorious torture camp in El Salvador. But both Trump and the Salvadoran President Bukele just were like, nah, we're not following that order. Mahmoud Khalil has a ruling in his case that his case needs to proceed in New Jersey. Weeks ago, that was ruled, and he's still languishing in a Louisiana detention center. So the idea that there are any like checks and balances in American democracy is cracking apart for a lot of people. And Trump is building, a much more authoritarian, racist version of capitalist democracy with the political power being concentrated in his hands in the executive. And although Trump flirts with fascism, has fascistic ideas, it's important to say that the US hasn't fully crumbled into fascism. The majority of the ruling class is still aligned with the old liberal world order, both in terms of foreign policy and domestically. This is apparent, like in the opposition to what Trump's been doing around Ukraine, the reactions to the tariffs, and so on. So we haven't seen capital relinquish itself to fascism at this point. And that's an important distinction, not for like quibbling about definitions or trying to say, oh, it's not that bad. It matters because we can still fight in the open. Some people who think that this is fascism have either just given up entirely or are starting to move things underground. And things may get worse. People may need to go underground at some point, but we're not there. And while there are possibilities to fight in the open and be building popular mass movements, we have to take them. Mm. In terms of the popular resistance, there are the big anti-Musk demos at Tesla outlets and the anti-Trump and anti-Musk hands-off demos. He's a real symbol of the regime and understood as like this unelected rich guy who somehow ended up being able to slash and burn the public sector. He's so roundly hated that people put stickers on their Tesla cars now that say like, I bought this before Elon lost it. And of course, you've seen the big AOC Bernie demos, their oligarchy tour that they've been doing the last few weeks, which are massive, very inspiring. It's noticeable that the crowds are a little whiter than you would see at a Palestine demo or a Black Lives Matter demo. And there are a lot of signs, like signs that people are holding, that show the crowd is a bit more liberal, a bit more middle class, with less radical demands than some of the more explicitly anti-racist movements we're part of. But many friends were telling me about like family group chats where there's people who've never been to a demo before who are showing up at the hands-off demos. One has a former Republican voting parent who has changed sides and is going to the demos now. And there are some people on the left who are quite sectarian about the Bernie demos. It's like these Democrats just betray us. why would we show up for what feels like kind of midterm campaigning or maybe even a 2028 presidential early version of campaigning? And it's completely the wrong perspective. The point isn't to go to the demos and listen quietly to what these progressive Dems have to say. Like Bernie said, Israel has a right to defend itself at the LA demo, for God's sake. Like, as if anyone needs to hear that right now. And the point is really like who is showing up at the demo? How can they be turned from a demo attendee into a demo leader? Um, in terms of labor resistance, obviously, as socialists, we're always looking towards what organized workers are doing because we know that's where we have power. And I want to be clear and not overstate what's going on. I think sometimes people want so badly for there to be a coordinated labor fight back that they oversell the state that we're in, but I also don't want to undersell it. There have been really great statements. There have been union-led legal challenges against free speech attacks, firings, the attacks on federal workers, the attempt to fully abolish the Department of Education. There's also a very visible union presence at the hands-off and Bernie demos. The postal workers will have contingents, the education workers will have contingents, and it's an excellent start, but we're not effectively leveraging our power as a class at the moment yet. The American Federation of Teachers had an action all around the country, but mostly they're telling people to call their representatives. And if you go to the National Education Association's media release page, you can see everything they're posting about is the court challenges. And it's a little bit similar to the know your rights stuff. Like you can get into a legal battle and eventually it will hit the Supreme Court, and either the court will do whatever Trump wants them to do, or they'll rule in a particular way. Like today, they ruled he can't use this extremely old law to deport people to Venezuela and El Salvador. But unless there's a strong enough movement in the streets and the workplaces, we're not going to be able to tip the scales against those legal rulings. Talking about general strikes is something we talk about. It's not necessarily something we expect union leaderships to be talking about, but even the United Auto Workers leadership has been talking about the need for a general strike, which is great news. The gap between where we are and where we need to be is big, but it's the people are discussing it. Although the UAW has also been accepting some of the nationalist logic of the tariffs and like protecting American jobs. So it's a mixed bag. I'm a librarian and I tried in my public sector union to vote up a sanctuary union motion about the deportations. It was so soft. I can't even tell you how easy I made it for the bureaucrats to sign on. The leadership still said no. And then the day after, a patron at the library told a cleaner that she was going to get him deported for being rude to her. So we're still waging this fight inside the union to say that immigration is union business in the library and in the public sector. In the process of making and losing that resolution, 2 contacts in 2 other unions used the language that I wrote up, and one of them passed the resolution. But even better, the process of making it and getting my delegates to support it gave me a chance to meet a lot more people in my union to fish out the radicals. Now we're coordinating if we can get a contingent to May Day, figuring out what other motions we can pass. If the leadership's being a hindrance, we're talking about creating our own librarian caucus so we can pass our own resolutions. Talking about how to activate membership, how can we democratize the leadership. We're starting a labor organizing book club. Librarians love a book club. And I have to give an honorable mention to a demo that happened the same day as the Bernie rally in LA last weekend, right afterwards. It was led by faculty and students from UCLA who are protesting over the revoked visas for people who did Palestine work last year. And this was called by the same group that adopted the sanctuary resolution. And they had speakers from Black Lives Matter, Jewish Voice for Peace, various political groups, but they almost all spoke in their capacity as organized workers, as union members. And, they were able to build that partly because in the weeks beforehand, they had brought a contingent of faculty to the hands-off demo. And this is led by a group that is in the process still of unionizing an unorganized part of faculty. And I think it's very important work. It's at the nexus of labor, Palestine, immigration, and the attacks on higher education. It's the seeds of the stuff that we need. That's my very local assessment. More broadly, the kind of combination of the opposition to the tariffs, Harvard pushing back on the college attacks, the ongoing hands-off demos. There was another demo today, all around the country, thousands of people. There are more and more cracks that in the Trump agenda that our activism can exploit. About the Democrats. We've always argued that looking to the Democrats is a dead-end strategy. More and more people are seeing why that is playing out in real time. They're the reason that we have Trump, not just the general rightward lurch, but all internal polling at the time showed that if Harris had taken a pro-Palestine stance, even a soft pro-Palestine stance, she could have won the election. But the Democrats are so welded to the imperial project in the Middle East that they would rather lose the election than lose Israel. Last month, one of the most senior Democrat senators, Chuck Schumer, voted for Trump's budget for the billionaires. Even though the Republicans have the Senate, he could have easily cast a protest vote, but he reached across the aisle instead. Cory Booker, another kind of well-established Democrat, filibustered for 25 hours about Trump and didn't mention Palestine once. And there's internal division in the Democrats. Like there are progressive, younger Democrats in kind of the AOC vein who are in the midterms planning to run against entrenched conservative Democrats. But that is still locked into the two-party system, and it's not the right place for our energy. So, there's more of an awareness about the Democrats and their limits. You get that sense very clearly when you go to the protests, but that still hasn't been translated into self-organization as an alternative yet. Yeah, so just to wrap up, I guess, rounding up the immigrants and the Palestine activists and all the rest of it, they're all tests. They're tests to see how far we're willing to let them go. Today it's trans women, tomorrow it's all LGBT people. Today it's abortion, tomorrow it's contraception and bodily autonomy in general. Today it's Palestine activists, tomorrow it's all social justice activists. And it's up to us to nip it all in the bud. And it remains to be seen whether we can. We're doing what we can on the ground. But the more that you in Australia protest your own little Trumps against the tariffs, the more demos you have that link Australian transphobia to American transphobia, the better position we're in the US and beyond. I mean, the struggle in Serbia, the struggle in Greece, the struggle in South Korea. It makes a huge difference when we can point to examples around the world of the best ways that we can fight.